Good morning, Louisville. My name is Theo Edmonds, co-founder of Ideas. We're the Creative Chamber of Commerce here in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome to week 7 of the Who's Louisville live stream webcast. This is our biggest show of the season so far. We have one more to go next week. Over the course of these last few weeks, we've been exploring who is Louisville today, looking at it from several different angles, entrepreneurship, all the way through to manufacturing and technology. Today, I'm joined by Jakub Sczcesny, Yalet Aldubi, and Brian Gupton with DataScene. And these two guests on my right here are partners of ours. Jakub has been here working with General Electric on our National Endowment for the Arts grant. Yalet is my counterpart in New York at our sister organization. And Brian is a local entrepreneur and business owner here in Louisville. So we're going to have a conversation today that looks at Louisville both from the inside and the outside. The name of the show is Who's Louisville, so I'll start off with Brian today. Who do you think Louisville is right now?
I think Louisville in a who is more of a what for me. I think in a big part, Louisville is the University of Louisville. I work a lot with the University of Louisville, and it definitely is a creative and learning and economic engine for the community. In a very unique way. I think that there are some really outstanding things that are going on at the university that that the community is starting to take advantage of.
That's great. So, Yalet, who do you think Louisville is from a perspective? You've had an opportunity to work with us now for almost a year, working from New York and helping to us install artists across companies in Louisville. Who do you think Louisville is?
I think Louisville, I go back and forth between the what and who as well. And for me, Louisville is a happening place. I was very pleasantly surprised to see what's going on here. And part of it is really that vibrant energy, that things are on a edge and happening and exploring and opening up for new experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think the people that are here are tapping onto that energy, willing to participate in the process, which is a big thing because a lot of times you'll have the what, but the who won't participate in the what.
Sure.
And here you have the right combination of the who and the what happening together.
How does the who and the what here compare to, say, Brooklyn, where Residency Unlimited is based?
The what in Brooklyn is a given. The who is also a given there. So in a way, it's hard, here it's easier to isolate the different factors, and that's why it's very conducive to our experiment, trying to integrate the artists as agents of change in the corporations. Where in Brooklyn, I think it's harder to isolate the process, the artistic process, because there's such an abundance of it there.
Yeah, sure.
So I find it fascinating to be able to look at each factor separately and say, wow, this is why the people are engaged, because this process is very clear to them. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Brooklyn, it's very hard to separate the people from the process, from the location.
All right. So, Jakub, you're from Warsaw, Poland. From an international perspective, who do you think Louisville is right now?
I'm wondering why you put this accent on the who thing. It is certainly an unknown. It's for me it's a tabula rasa situation from looking from the outside. So it's a great unknown of a city that produces a couple of associations from the outside, but it's going to be, from my perspective, the Actors Theater first. This was the first American theater to come after liberalization of Poland in '91 to Warsaw. Then it's gonna be probably for some like horse-loving people, the Derby, and then for some booze-loving people, the Bourbon. But then, of course, there's Hunter S. Thompson and a couple of other things. But when you come here, it's actually you understand that this is about energy. It's a coming up communitarian spirit that is really interesting, and the link between people, entrepreneurial power, and culture, that is also purely an American ingredient that you don't see so much in Europe, coming together with very different ethnies, with the university, with FirstBuild being a place where people experiment, with big manufacturers and different sources of money here, and the fact that there's an art scene and a city with a very interesting history. All this, I think, is committing to something that we might say is a dawn of something new, like a new boiling soup. I don't know what's going to be the taste of it, but I hope it's going to be a very good one.
What do you see from your day-to-day? You talked about the university, but also tell us a little bit about DataScene first and what DataScene does.
Sure. Well, and I'd like to follow up on
Sure.
what both of the other guests shared, is that I think it's hard to your point, it's hard to answer whose city this is, because when you think of all of the names that would come to mind normally in the city, Louisville's a very welcoming city, I think. And the people that have been put in place, whether they are elected officials or community trustees, by their deeds and actions, they are very much facilitators to make this city anybody's city. And so when you come here, and I'm originally not from here, I grew up in the western end of the state of Kentucky. It's a very welcoming place because there's a lot of immigrants to the city. You know, you have your Louisville natives, but there was a whole cadre when I attended university of Louisville immigrants that were here who have kind of made this their own city. So it's a hard question to answer. But as far as what DataScene does, we are, I would be considered a social entrepreneur. We have a partnership with the University of Louisville and the James Graham Brown Cancer Center, and we have created a computing grid of Apple computers in our eastern and western Kentucky rural school districts. And that computing grid provides cancer research computing capacity, drug discovery capacity for the Brown Cancer Center to accelerate those cancer drugs to market in an expeditious and cost-effective way. And in exchange for that, so the kids are getting new Apple workstations out there, which is great because they didn't really have access to those, and I think we probably all like those types of computers. So they're getting brand new technology to replace aging technology. Not only are they getting access to opportunities in the sciences, but we also know that not all kids are into the sciences. So those workstations are out there, and it's allowing them to write more effectively, to do photography and take opportunities in the arts more effectively, and so they get that. And then at the end of the day, we hope as a part of this that we are growing some new Louisville immigrants out in the state. We're in about a third of the rural communities statewide. And so the University of Louisville provides scholarships to these kids to come on to university here and pursue degrees in science and technology and engineering and mathematics as a part of kind of the end of the day, closing the loop opportunity. We've been doing this since 2004. And it's been a very rewarding experience. It's entrepreneurialism in a very different light.
How did you get started in the rural parts of the state and working inwards toward Louisville?
Sure. As I said earlier, I'm a rural guy myself. I grew up in Princeton, Kentucky, and so working with the Kentucky General Assembly, the legislators there knew that they needed to bring economic development and diversification opportunities to our rural areas. Majority of these areas are coal-producing regions in the state. We have our discussions about coal here in the changing economies and how that impacts our economy statewide, including Louisville. And so in the interest of diversifying the economies and broadening our tax base, we brought the grid to the rural regions, which allows them to do all the things that they want to do. But I think it also sends a clear and straightforward message to all Kentuckians that if you can do this in, you know, the hinterlands of Kentucky, it can be done anywhere.
You touched a little bit on the relationship between what you're doing and art. Can you talk a little bit about that? Then I want to come over here and see what you guys think about what the relationship is from your all standpoint these days between art and business, art and entrepreneurship. So what are you seeing on the ground?
So seeing the students, you know, this is their first foray into this in a lot of areas. So they have a lot of innate talent that hasn't been developed. And so seeing those folks kind of in the embryonic stage has been interesting in what they're doing. I mean, and a lot of these students are participating in Governor's School for the Arts, which is sponsored by the Kentucky Center for the Arts here in Louisville. And they're getting accepted to that. And so we're seeing a lot of things in photography. One of our partnerships is with Western Kentucky University and their Mountain Workshop Series. And one of the annual things that they do is this workshop. And they go into a rural community somewhere in the state. They bring in editors and photographers and videographers from National Geographic, USA Today, LA Times, New York Times, a tremendous amount of Pulitzer winners that have come from WKU. And so they bring these people in to work with their students in a rural community to tell that community's story. And as a part of that, we provide workstations for them to do the week-long event.
And how old are these kids generally that they're working with?
These are college-age kids, but then what's going on is that instructors, journalists, photography teachers, English teachers from the data seam schools are coming in, and they're getting slots in this as well. And they're getting experience with these professionals that they wouldn't get anywhere else. And then they are taking those skill sets back into the school systems and working with their own students.
I know, Ayala, you've been working recently with that intersection between art and young folks in schools there in Brooklyn. And it relates to the intersection of technology and art and youth development too. Can you talk a little bit about the project that you're doing with Kristen MacGyver there in Brooklyn and how that maybe relates to what Brian was talking about?
Of course. So part of Limited, it's an artist residency that works with artists from all over the world. And what we're doing is really customizing their experience in the city and creating collaborations with them, setting them up for different exhibitions, and really making them think what the next stage in their artistic process is. This art project was created by Kristen, and it's called The Selfie in Green. And what she did was take using a facial recognition algorithm, she took her Facebook photo and decoded it, and then assigned the fauna and flora of upstate New York to the numbers. So she planted these numbers, and it created a manifestation of her face. So it was a portrait, but that was a garden. When I saw this project, I said, wow, this is fantastic. I think we could bring it to the younger generation, to the kids. And we identified middle schoolers as the cutoff point in terms of right on the cusp of adulthood. And actually there's a whole, NPR is doing a whole series now on being 12, and this is exactly the age group that we're working with, because they've identified that this is the biggest jump from infancy. This is the next stage, being 12. And that's when they start recognizing, their adult capabilities, or trying to figure out what's going on in a more pedagogic way, in a more constructive way. So what we're doing is launching this in a middle school in Brooklyn. It's MS 136. And it's a very mixed group of kids, and it makes it really interesting because they each come from a different ethnic background. So we just launched it last week, and the kids were really excited. And part of the goal of the project is really to connect them back to nature, but via technology. So not only are we showing them what the technological capabilities of decoding their face is, but we're also saying, okay, here's the link between your face and nature as we plant it. At the end, they're going to have the whole front of the school is going to have their portraits, but in gardens, hanging gardens. And for them, the whole explanation of what conceptual art is really far-fetched. They have a very hard time understanding this. For them, a portrait is the Mona Lisa. And to try and make that link between their face and the manifestation of their face in the flowers is a link that has not been created for them before. So now they're being not told this, but they're experiencing the whole process of turning something that is very concrete, like numbers, into something that is very far-fetched. So we showed them different examples of conceptual art, the Silhouette Garden, and there was another artist who used data recognition algorithm to create masks, and they were blown away because all of a sudden it uses parts of their brain that are not used in this way. One of the biggest achievements was really that the computer identified these kids as completely different. So if the kid came from a Hispanic background, it identified them as an Asian background. And if they were 12-year-olds, the computer identified them as 24 or 34-year-old. And the only one that the computer really managed to get the data right was their teacher, who was a 27-year-old. And I think part of it was because he's got enough information out there in the virtual world in order to cross-reference all the data. For them, many of them did not have a Facebook account, so the computer was just, I guess, guessing from their facial recognition data what they were all about. But this really served to prove our point, because it showed the kids that the computer sees them completely different than the reality. And it showed them that, you know, the computer is manipulating their information, and if we get that information out there, different marketing firms are going to get that information and gear the information towards them in a whole way that may be completely false. So that was one thing. The other thing was to show them that they could reclaim the authorship over their information.
Over their own face.
Over their own. Really trying to make sure that what they put out there is accurate, that they don't put information that they don't want it being manipulated later on. So there are a lot of good things happening out of these faulty glitches, and at the end of the process, which is going to happen when the flowers bloom at the end of June, they're going to see the connection to nature. And the extra benefit was really having the teacher say to us, you know what, this is fantastic, I'm going to talk about this in the next few weeks and integrate it into my materials in class. And he's a math teacher. Later on, we're going to be launching it in different forms. It's going to be selfie and sound, which is going to be connecting musical notes to those numbers, and also selfie and paint, which is going to be another articulation or manifestation of their face in the painting.
May I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
So as a part of, when you're talking about the integrity of the data that's going out there, that's out into the ether with these students, especially at the age at 12, they're a bit impressionable. They're just starting to get onto, you know, the information superhighway, as they call it. Is there any discussion about kind of digital citizenship within that? Because we definitely have challenges today as employers with what prospective employees are putting out there, and we've got a generation of kids, young adults, who've put a lot of stuff out there that they probably should not, especially if they want a job eventually. So within that, when you talk about data and reclaiming and that sort of thing, is there any discussion kind of that digital citizenship role and what's appropriate and what's not?
There is, and this actually brings the whole topic to light, because up till now you can bring it in different contexts, but it won't make the impact that it makes here. Mm-hmm. The fact that they were really upset when they saw their information out there, because they saw information that wasn't them.
Okay.
So That said, if they put a photo up there and they really didn't mean to put the photo out there because it was from a party or from, you know, an interaction that they should not be seen in
Right.
or whatnot, all of a sudden they see where this could lead to.
Okay.
So I think it's starting, this is a tricky age because, you know, they're still kids, but they're getting into that stage where they're starting to get the consequence part of the deal. So this is where we're hoping that it's going to become really tangible, because part of it is really teaching them how to turn a conceptual topic or conceptual object into something that they could relate to, and that could really have an imprint in their physical sense. So I can tell you maybe in a year from now what the
Right.
consequences are, but to see the process happening is really fascinating.
Jakub, you're working in portraiture of a city in a certain way, I think, with the project you've been doing with GE that combines all of these things we've been talking about. Can you talk a little bit about the Louisville Table and for those who are listening, maybe explain what it is first, maybe, and then let's back up to the beginning and come into the process of how you created it.
The Louisville Table comes from the conclusion that we need, as Western societies, communities, we need new tools of that will integrate us, something that will make us come together, share knowledge, process things together. In this case, it's about cooking. Because I've realized that most of modernity was creating of high degree of efficiency and very technically involving and also helping us a lot with having the extra time that was postulated. But the problem is that the modernity didn't create really many tools that would put people together in a positive way. So the table is a reaction to what is a normal kitchen nowadays, a contemporary kitchen, which is a place and a tool, because it's in fact a tool, a sort of a machine that is created for one, maybe two people to work together, but not really cooperate, at best in a Fordian way. So thinking about the pre-modern table as a space where people were in family and friends were preparing things together, talking, singing even, like in Polish tradition, many country songs were related to preparation of food. Of like a couple of people sitting by a table doing pierogi or whatever and singing. And all this is lost. We have iPads and TV dinners. Except that Louisville is actually a fantastic place to eat with plenty of good restaurants here. But so I was thinking, like, what if we create something universal, something that will not be a fancy fetish for 5 minutes, something that might stay a long time at home, something that would be this joining thing, a table that is high enough to work by it when standing. It has an induction cooktop. It has a special drawers that cool or heat the food, so one don't have to go all the time to the refrigerator or and then this thing is a heavy piece of Kentucky grown cherry solid wood, something that is 2-inch thick and will stay forever at home. So it's really counter a gesture to what our reality is producing as 5-minute fantasies. And from what we see now in FirstBuild and with the community that is also endorsing this project very much, I see that it touches upon like very simple, universal, communitarian need of people. And I hope this is also relating to what's happening here in the city.
What was it about Louisville specifically? Because I know back in the fall you were here for almost 5 weeks, and now you're back again. At the very beginning, let's go back to when you first arrived. What was your general impressions about the city that guided the thinking in the very early days of this project in conceptualizing what ultimately will be the Louisville Table?
I realized how many layers of communitarian interactions there are.
Such as?
Ethnic groups, foodie culture, entrepreneurial, artistic, joining elements coming together, not only being business providing infrastructure and funding, but also business being open to have an element of change, an agent of change in their structures, and people from with an entrepreneurial culture coming with new ideas that are extremely creative, like the entire new startup culture here, and the maker class. I understood that this is actually like a prototypal maker community that could maybe one day end up being a sort of a Silicon Valley of manufacturing. With plus all the foodie consciousness that is here, all the restaurants, all the urban farming aspect, and farming in general. We're in a farming state. So this coming together might give, I don't think it's going to take long, something very interesting.
So you work a lot with the University of Louisville. FirstBuild, where Jakub has been working, is a partnership in some ways between GE and the University of Louisville. What do you see the university's role as in helping to shape the identity of Louisville right now?
Sure. The great thing about universities in general is willing and have the ability to take chances with entrepreneurialism in a way that traditional business would not. Do you agree? There's a lot of things that you do as an entrepreneur in the early days that traditional business would go, okay, what's the bottom line?
Yeah.
What's our return on investment? When are we going to see an exit strategy for this? And sometimes that takes a while. Because there is, within entrepreneurialism, I think the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of a particular opportunity has to do with how much education you have the opportunity and communication within that education to provide around a particular concept. Speaking from my own experience, and the University of Louisville was an early supporter of DataSeam and what we did to say, hey, we're going to aggregate all of these school kid computers and we're going to make a virtual supercomputer out of it. You know, in many communities where I'm from or that we deal with, you had to first go, well, what's a supercomputer and why do we need it? Where the university was able to nurture that along, and I think that the university, I mean, with FirstBuild and what they're doing there, and in fact, one of the individuals that's at the university kind of working around with that, Dr. Bill Brundage, was the original head of the Office of the New Economy at a state level, and he was creating policy around entrepreneurial pursuit, you know, a decade ago, where when you talk about new economy, it just eventually becomes the economy. But I think the university has, with the variety of disciplines that U of L has, as universities in general, they have the ability to touch entrepreneurial pursuit in so many different facets that can be fostered within the Louisville community. Because we have a variety of interests here. We talk about, there's so many different, food culture, you know, the bio-based industry, what's going on at FirstBuild. There's so many different touch points within the university where there are skill sets, there are professors and professionals that are in the university environment that young entrepreneurs or emerging entrepreneurs can learn from and use those resources to benefit their concept.
Yeah, we were precisely discussing yesterday the subject of the design thinking.
Yes.
And like, yesterday also during the evening we were thinking like why in entrepreneurial and especially manager culture it is hard to switch to design thinking, and it becomes a sort of a fetish thing that people actually would rather not touch because it's too strange. It's not really linear in terms that are being shown to students of entrepreneurial studies. This is something that's about iteration. You have to go around a bit, you have to be highly critical and so on, criticize your own and the rest of the team ideas, work rather in horizontal grids than in a vertical structure. So there's a set of things that are, pretty innovative when it comes to business. And it happens here in Louisville. We have a bunch of places where we see people who are entrepreneurs who are using this thinking. So it's a grand moment.
What do you think our biggest challenge in Louisville is right now, Brian, to really seeing the potential of our startup culture? And I make a differentiation in my mind between entrepreneur and startup. Entrepreneur is if I own a chain of fast food restaurants, I'm an entrepreneur, but a startup culture is something that I think is a little bit different in the sense that you don't fully know where it's going to yet, and in the early days you are really creating something new and nurturing it into existence, from idea to manifestation. And I think that's actually where Louisville's big strength is right now. What are the big barriers to us fully realizing the potential of that for our city?
So, I think the nucleus of any concept, you have that entrepreneur, and he is kind of that Don Quixote. He's seen as a little bit crazy, or they, not he, they are seen as a little bit crazy, and so it's hard and I think in Kentucky we have a culture where there is a little bit of a fear of failure, where with the startup culture that you have on the West Coast or the startup culture that you have on the East Coast, there are folks that are involved in startups that either do well, don't do well, and you're not the neighbor down the street going, oh, Tommy's dad lost his job because he was following that crazy idea. It's just your serial entrepreneurs, your serial startups. And I think we still have a bit of an aversion to that here, because it is while it's a bigger city, it's still a small community, and you don't want to fail. I think there's some benefit in that, is that all of you're working without a net, and all of your chips are in the center of the table, and so if it's a good concept, you're working harder to succeed as opposed to moving on to the next opportunity because you don't have other options. You're all in.
You see the prospect.
You're all in, yeah. And so I think we have a lot of really good ideas here, but as we normalize the startup culture, all of these opportunities may be things that may employ 10 to 15 workers in a smaller, where our traditional economic development interests understand a large building, a ribbon cutting, where some of these folks may be working in an old shed in Portland. And so normalizing the startup culture, and then also creating the workforce that understands I'm not going to work in a factory with 1,000 people. I'm working with 10 or 15 people, and we're working in a close environment, and it's feast or famine sometimes, and all of our ships rise or all of our ships sink together. So being able to say this is an okay environment to be in, and creating that workforce around that understands that supports these Don Quixotes, I think is where we need to head next.
How can artists help Louisville overcome that barrier that he's talking about?
No, it's funny because when I was thinking about your first question about what is Louisville and who is Louisville, I was trying to identify the players, and some of them are really, when we look at the corporations here, which are part of our target audience. So we have the startups, but we have also the more traditional ones, like in manufacturing and beverages and health, and so on, across the different disciplines. And each field has its own challenges and obstacles, but I think across the board, I think one of the biggest obstacles is to have the corporations or the businesses let the artistic process come into fruition. And a lot of times they'll say, and we
Do you
discussed
think
it
that's
yesterday.
related to what he was talking about, that fear of failure is maybe why they have trouble doing
Yeah.
that?
So they cling on to, you know, the old paradigms and, you know, the formulas that they know.
Yeah, it's a matter of language also, because the big businesses communicate in a different way than startup people, and same with artists, and so suddenly you have to work on a meta language.
Right. And they're different, the different, you know, lexicon they use is sometimes could be a very big obstacle, because what you understand as a startup, you know, initializer, I as a curator and him as an artist, we can define it completely differently. But that's why this process is so crucial to the success of any project, because you really need to you have to establish the same lexicon, and at the same time you have to make sure that the expectations are met. You can have, you know, a wide range of expectations, but you can define them within a certain upper limit and lower limit. So you know that even if the upper limit is a little bit different than mine, we're still within that limit. That said, I really think that patience is one of the biggest virtues on both sides, but part of it is because an artist works completely differently than, you know, a startup person.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so, you know, artists, and I've worked with, you know, hundreds of artists, they're each different. So for me, each artist is like a different company that I'm dealing with. And part of it is really understanding their own cultural mentality and their artistic process. And some artists are exhibitionist, and some artists are inclusive, and some artists take longer to understand even what you want from them. And some artists, and they can be super intelligent, but, you know, their digestive process is a bit different. At the same time, you know, what's brilliant about the artists across the board is the fact that they can synthesize all the information in a way that is completely different than what you as a startup person or, you know, manager of a company can do. So if you have that virtue of patience where you can say, okay, I'm going to let him go through this process and see what comes out of it, then you're going to come with the upper hand, because I really think that the artist has the capacity to really pull out or extract the essence of the environment, of the process, of the different goal that you're trying to have him achieve. So if you I'm gearing it towards you, you know, as a startup person, but this is across the board, you know, and I would say that, you know, even startup people who are more flexible in their thinking and more fluid in the way they organically work, and to have that supposedly the artistic process as part of their being, have a difficult time understanding the artistic process when it comes to a halt, because a lot of artists need that withdrawal within their movement in order to really go deeper into understanding what is needed from them.
So what I'm hearing, I just want to kind of put it in different words, because I think I understand what you're talking about, is that, so if you're a company, whether it's a startup company or whether it's a normal company, and you're having, often, especially as a startup company, we find bits of knowledge about what we're doing ourselves when other people explain it to us, right? That's something that's a very common thing, because it's only after we get that feedback that we know how we're impacting, and, you know, that's the whole pivot, that's the whole point of customer discovery. And so having an artist who has, there are millions of different artists, and so there's a million different artistic processes, no one is the same. But what artists really do well is take in all sources of data points that are not the normal expected data points. They're synthesizing and they're getting inspiration from a lot of different places. As you spend a number of years spending your day-to-day synthesizing the world around you, as your reason for getting up in the morning, that's going to give you a skill set and a toolkit that you can use no matter which way you point it in. So what we're finding that is in the relationship between artists and companies, whether they be large companies or startups, artists bring a very unique customer discovery process to the corporations that we're working with. Sometimes then that is all that it is, but then sometimes that is the beginning of what becomes a new product, or it becomes a pivot moment for a startup or a company. And in the terms of where we're living at in the world today, I think we're all at a place where we understand that no matter if you're a large company or a small company, if you are not disrupting yourself constantly, whether in your internal processes, someone else is probably doing it for you. And so this relationship between an artist who is always the ever disruptor, and an artist in many ways I think is like a forever startup, because it is a constant process of disruption.
Yes.
That's the reason that they
Yes.
exist, is to disrupt
Yes.
things. And so if we can figure out this lexicon issue, right, and we can figure out these commonalities of activity, and find words that we can effectively use to manage the conversation between each other.
Translational language.
Translation, absolutely. I think there's something really powerful in that.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I mean, synthesis is a big part of startup, and with each piece that an artist does, that's a new, I think traditional business would call that a new product or service that this artist has released, you know, and whether you like it or not depends on whether it sells or not when you do your opening of, you know, I mean, in traditional business, I think maybe the artist would be pleased with that piece, but you know, depending on what the market says, using traditional business language, you would yet to be seen. And I think the challenge for startups is that once you find something that works, and I mean, I'm speaking from my startup I wouldn't necessarily call us a startup today. We're kind of established. It's hard that once you find something that works, you get into that pattern and you work with it.
I think it's the same for artists in many cases too, especially with the art market being what it is today. I mean, you find
this works. I'm
something
gonna go
that
with
sells,
this.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, right, absolutely.
Because that's the market, what the market in many ways incentivizes you to do, whether you're an artist or whether you're a company.
Right.
Yeah, but let's remember that most dynamic, especially tech-related or high-tech companies or whatever, .coms, whatever, are forced to have this anxiety of a startup embedded. Even though the thing is selling well, they have to go up with new ones.
What's next?
Yeah.
There's some churn
But
there.
to say to the credit of the artist, I think artists are tortured souls to a certain degree. And the reason I'm saying it is that if you ask an artist that has produced the same piece over and over again 10 to 100 times, if that's how they see themselves as an artist, I can guarantee that the answer would be no. Whereas a business or a corporation or a startup, with a successful product, they would want to replicate it because it's all about the money revenue, okay? And here the artist is selling their soul in order to, satisfy this monetary need or what's not. But at the end of the day, if you would ask them if they would restart all over again in a different capacity, I think most artists would say yes, because they're interested in the process and they want to see what comes out of them at the end of this process. And they're, and I think part of it is really for businesses to understand that if they let the artistic process really be implemented properly into the whole interaction, their exponential growth will be much bigger. So that's where Theo and I come into play, because a lot of times connecting you two may be a little bit more complicated and we're here to understand the process and to understand it ourselves first and then try and explain it to you. So when you two come together, it's the product done properly as you explain it, but he will explain it as a manifestation of his ideas.
Understood.
You used the term social entrepreneur when we started. how do you define social entrepreneur? Because there's a few different definitions that float out there.
Sure. So for me, I define social entrepreneur as there's a difference between there's a difference between, I think, just traditional entrepreneurialism and startup, and you think about like a .com, like a Google or an Amazon or whatever. Their product or service. They were originally a startup of some sort. While they're trying to solve for something, they're trying to solve for something and be profitable. I mean, they have shareholders. I mean, so I think a lot of times when you're a social entrepreneur, you may be structured as a nonprofit like we are, which allows the universities and other educational entities that we work with to pursue grants and piggyback off of kind of the data scene story to be more competitive for those things. I think at the end of the day for us, our goal is to cure cancer and accelerate research and get some kids educated at the end of the day and try to make the world a better place. And so when I think about, and not to pat ourselves on the back, I mean, because there's a lot of social entrepreneurialism out there. I think some of what's going on in the West End with the food culture, of our farm to table initiatives that are going on here in town, that would be considered social entrepreneurialism to me. I mean, they may be profitable, but at the end of the day, it's something that benefits everybody else far more than it benefits the principals within the principal individuals within the organization. And that's kind of how I define social entrepreneurialism.
Using that definition, would you define an artist as a social entrepreneur?
He can play this role.
In what way?
Not forcefully. It's not that he is supposed to do it 100%, but if participating in the social process, he might be committing to something that is long-term, that is changing reality, that is making the world a better place, and that might also create some infrastructure or funding for him and for the others. So he could be embedded through the tools, the Darwinistic tools that you were enumerating. He could be embedded in a process like this and become an agent of change, of positive change.
Specific to artists within this, and to some of the questions earlier about business within kind of the art, I think there's a variety of strata there that has played out before. I don't know so much if it plays out here in the way that it has. Example I'm going to give, but I think a lot about the Detroit Institute of Arts in Detroit. So the DIA was set up it's held by the city, right, and has a tremendous standing collection. But what's most interesting about the collection, and I'm a big Detroit person. I love Detroit, and it's one of my favorite places to visit. I know that's kind of a hard thing to say for some, but I love Detroit. But the DIA was set up and was funded predominantly by the industrialists who were making all the money and was bringing all the workers to Detroit, to advance their entrepreneurial ideas, not so much the social entrepreneurial ideas. And so what happened as a part of that is that the industrialists were buying works of art to place in the DIA for their workers. They wanted to bring culture to the workers, to these folks that were following and helping their ideas become reality. And so within that, the artists themselves, I think, play a role. And so when you go there, it's while there may be a Picasso hanging on the wall, it's more interesting to see who bought it and provided it to the DIA, gift of Henry Ford or this. And so and within that, the industrialists were kind of trying to outdo each other. in trying to culture the workers. And so I think to your point about being a social entrepreneur with artists, the artist becomes an inadvertent social entrepreneur because here's their piece, the work of art, all of these people are seeing it, and it's opening these workers' minds who have not had access to this otherwise to a new reality. And so by the patronage of the industrialist, the artist becomes the social entrepreneur.
Without even knowing.
Without knowing, yeah, unknowingly becomes a social entrepreneur because they are benefiting this whole worker class that is bringing these ideas into reality.
Let's
Can I
follow.
comment on
Yeah,
that?
I want to jump in here.
Because my thinking is that this is the old model of how the artist impacts, be them social, entrepreneurial agents or not. Our model is to actually change the environment in a way that is more active. So
Inorganic.
When Jakub goes into FirstBuild, it's not the table. He's not creating the table and just putting it out there for the workers in a space to come and view it and say, "Wow, this is an interesting angle. We haven't done this before. Let's do it now." But rather, he works with them to make them understand his process and how he sees things and how he thinks, different angles should be created and how does it, impact the product at the end of the day. And how is it going to impact, the whole cultural mentality? And how is it going to impact their production mentality? So he's interested, or correct me if I'm wrong, in the greater impact of really making them bring it into their daily activity. So not only in terms of, oh, this is a phenomenal table that was created here. We can look at it and say.
Yeah, but both ways work. Of course, what we're doing is about an active role of an artist in the process, in which he's absolutely consciously involved. You're talking about something more passive here. But look, I will tell you, just sorry to cut you. There was this very crucial moment in my cooperation with FirstBuild's team, with different engineers. Like hardcore engineers, like hard-stepping guys, yeah. And in some moment, of course, they were afraid I'm going to be one of these French guys of a beret and coming like a diva and having problems and being authoritarian. And in some moment, we were sitting by the idea and was sketching the idea, and I said, guys, we're doing it for ourselves. Imagine it's for your family. And this is when suddenly, it became like, oh God, yes, I would love to make some pancakes on it. So suddenly the thing entered into the
You made it relevant to them.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
They identified them.
Yeah.
I want to come back to what you were saying, because I thought you kind of went where I was thinking. In the situation you described, and it was interesting you brought up Ford, because that's fraught with a whole history there of personality. Henry Ford himself, and the way he did a lot of social engineering in some ways.
Very much so.
I think there's a risk in the model you described, because to me, that model, it imposes the values and the worldview of one person on an entire city and an entire population, as this is how you should see the world. If you had said, so that's a place of privilege, and while I think it's very crucial that everyone in the world have access to the great works of art that have been created, to say that this should be your world lens as a city because I choose these paintings to show you, I think is problematic. Very much so today, because and I'll bring it up into the modern context, something that goes through my mind a lot today. I think in the modern context, it's also very dangerous to look at that.
It's not gone well.
Well, even then, that's another conversation of that's a value judgment, which is a whole other, maybe that's a beer conversation.
Oh, sure.
Bourbon conversation. Because one of the statistics that I cannot get out of my mind these days is that, let's talk about going back to the Google example. Africa is Google's fastest growing market right now. And in 2010, there was 2 billion people across the world connected online. By 2020, it's projected that we're going to come close to 5 billion or a little bit more connected online with the same access to the same artificial intelligence, the same things that you and I have today. That is 3 billion new creator minds coming online that do not come from this Western construct or this Western framework. And so when we are saying that the worldview should be filtered only through the privileged viewpoint, I think it leads to a far less interesting world. It leads to a far more dynamic place. And you look at Detroit, to use Detroit for example, from a city that only was built around one specific viewpoint, it left it very vulnerable. And I think, when you're talking about diversifying a portfolio in the stock market, you're gonna spread it out a little bit. You're gonna have a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different levels of risk.
Oh, sure. And I mean, I think, and we've seen, and now they're coming back, and there's a younger, very blue-collar entrepreneurial pursuit that's going on. There's a great maker and food culture that's going on there now, where I think, whether it was intentional or unintentional, Detroit had a single point of failover. And when it went, everything kind of fell apart. They're doing better. I mean, everybody, but using the DIE may be a rough example because it's more of a historical example as opposed to where art is going today. And most artists today, there is a social engagement. They're not as passive, where they're creating art for a patron to pick up and do with as they will. I mean, art is out there and it's in your face these days, and there's so, and in Louisville, we have a tremendous variety that folks, just even on this street, doing the gallery hop, there may be you can go in one place and they generally have stuff that I like. Other places, that's not for me. And that's the great thing about it. To your point, when it's seen, we have all these different galleries here with variety of things going on, just not here, just in Louisville in general, and it's enjoyable because you do find things you like. You do find things that challenge you and allow you to think. And to your connected discussion, for me, by 2020 or 2030, or when we're long gone, all of that connectedness, because the artistic experience, the progression involves some part of withdrawal. As you were talking about, you have to kind of go back and synthesize and think and have patience about it. There are concerns that I have is how does all of that connectedness all of the time change the creative process, the artistic process? Because sometimes you just have to turn off and think. I'm going to walk away from this canvas for a bit and think about it. And when you're always hooked up, same point. If you're in front of that canvas all the time, sometimes you can't think. If you're completely hooked up to the internet all the time, sometimes it's hard to unplug and just think.
And I think there again is the flexibility of the artistic process, because the artistic process can both help you plug into your fullest extent and very much can help you unplug at the same time. It's a very flexible, interdisciplinary, holistic process that can be used in a variety of ways that we're just now learning how to explore some of those, I think, through the work we're doing and the work that is being done around the country and other places. 5 years out, what do you think Louisville is going to be known for? Short answer.
I think the reality is that there's not a short answer. I think we're going to be known for a great and good many things that has momentum now. I think we're going to continue to be seen as a food culture. I think we're going to continue to be seen as a place where you can come and express ideas in a welcoming environment, and I think that you've got people here that will support those ideas because somebody, for me 10 years ago, somebody was supporting me. So as a part of that community trust, there is a unwritten obligation that you are supporting ideas because somebody did for you before.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which is I think that's the most special thing about the city of Louisville is that somebody's willing to help you because somebody helped them before.
That is something and that's a theme that we are finding over and over. Some people call it social entrepreneurship. There's some people call it compassion. There's a lot of different words that I think are components of it, but it is that pay it forward mentality.
Absolutely.
That it is an exceptional thing that is here that I have not experienced in a lot of the other places where I've been.
So I would call it an incubator. I mean, I feel that whatever you said. See, we have to reopen.
Leo is out this week, and they are our co-sponsor of this event.
So I would take whatever you said. You're the content. What you said is the content of. Because for me, Louisville, in 10 years from now, every time people are going to want to try and experiment with something new, they're going to come here.
That's right.
That's awesome.
This would be best
Yes.
to have a very strong brand as a place, as a city of experiment.
I will tell you that is also the other thing that we are hearing in our work, a lot of ideas with all the crowds that we're running in. It's not so much that those of us who are on the ground, whether it's in the business world, or whether it's in the technology world, or whether it's in the art world, the way we're doing, is not that we are going to be necessarily the next Silicon Valley of manufacturing, or we're going to be the next Portland, Oregon, that we're going to be the next anything, but we could be this place of radical experimentation that can be effectively and efficiently done toward productive ends, unlike any other place in the country. And you combine that kind of experimentation with our logistics operations that we have here. That's an exceptional growth strategy to think about having ideas incubated here and then transported out into the world. That connects us to the success of so many other places and so many other cities because we're seen as part of the process of other people succeeding. And I think that gets back to that pay it forward kind of even mentality that's instilled in us here.
Agreed. It's something that, well, of course, I didn't experience it anywhere else, and I came here for university, and it's just the expectation now. So I'm glad you guys are here.
So I would hope so. Just like we had the Bilbao effect, now we're going to have the Louisville effect.
The Louisville effect. I think there's a potential for that, for sure.
That's why we're here.
And it's happening today. Is we're feeling that and we're seeing it. Thank you guys for being here this morning. Tonight at 5:30 here at Zephyr Gallery, 610 East Market in New Lou, is the launch of the Louisville Table, which is a program that is supported in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, Our Town Grant Program. We hope that you will join us tonight, and thank you for joining us this morning.